Hello and welcome to Voices of Westerly, a new podcast from the United Theater featuring conversations, many of which are recorded in front of a live audience, with the creative and professional individuals who make Westerly, Rhode Island such a unique and inspired community of leaders, innovators, and artists. I'm your host, Tony Nunes, Artistic Director of the United Theater, here in the beautiful downtown Arts District of Westerly, Rhode Island. The Voices of Westerly series is inspired by Westerly photographer and artist Josh Behan, who created a Faces of Westerly portrait series, which we premiered here a couple of years ago at the United and is now on permanent display and rotation in our halls. Voices of Westerly live discussions will take place monthly in our post-credit scene event space here at the United. And our first guest is Ayana Melvan. And Ayana is the Director of Conservation Action with Aquarium Conservation Partnership. And she's going to talk about that, some of her work with Mystic Aquarium, and more. So please welcome Ayana up to the stage.
Thank you.
Welcome to Voices of Westerly.
Thank you, Tony.
So I kind of do these, I don't know if you've heard any of these interviews before, but I kind of structure these similarly. I ask some of the same questions to all of our guests. The point of this podcast is to talk about what makes this region, Westerly in particular, an interesting place to live and work, and what people love about this area and the work and communities in this area. So I always start these with the same question, which is kind of your Westerly origin story. Which is, I know that you live in Westerly.
I do.
So your Westerly origin story question is, how did you end up in Westerly? Are you from Westerly? How did you land here?
That's a great question to start. Well, thank you so much for having me. This is pretty cool. And so Rhode Island, you can never be, truly a Rhode Islander if you weren't born and raised here. So I guess I'm still an outsider. I've lived here for 14 years. And how I got to Westerly is interesting. So I lived in UMass, I went to UMass Amherst and lived in Amherst for a while after I graduated, and I met a family who lived on the Pawcatuck River right over here. And they were like, oh, we live in Westerly Pawcatuck. I was like, cool. Had no idea what they were talking about. They were like, Rhode Island. I'm like, oh my God, Rhode Island. And they said, yeah, we live right next to Mesquamaket Beach. And I said, no way. There's no way. Mesquamaket Beach is not down there. Because I used to go to Mesquamaket Beach as a kid with my aunt and my friends all the time. And I had no idea it was in the town of Westerly. I grew up in Massachusetts, and when you come down here, you go on the highway, you get on 78. You don't know where you are.
And you get off in Connecticut.
And you get off in Connecticut, and then you go down and you go to the beach, and then you go home, right? 7 miles of beautiful beach. So my aunt passed away, not blood related, but I always say related by water, from cancer. And I never thought I was going to move down here. I had all these dreams to move to the Virgin Islands, Florida for some reason. That was a weird young thing. Italy, I had all these plans, and the first job that I got and the first place to live that I got was in Connecticut. So I lived in Connecticut for a very short time, a year, and then I came here. And one of the interesting things is I also moved to Westerly because I really wanted to live near the beach. And the family that I met up at UMass Amherst, they brought me down here, reacquainted me with the area. I was like, this is fantastic. And in Massachusetts, it was really hard to move to the coastline because it's a lot of money. The Cape Cod, have you heard of the Cape?
I have. Very cheap.
Very cheap. So I saw the affordability down here, got the job. It was like a no-brainer. I had no idea that I was going to stay down here. I thought this was very temporary. So now my kids are born here, and I got married on Mesquamaket Beach.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So
you've been here for 10 years?
14.
14 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And so when you sent me, I'm going to stick with the UMass bit here.
Sure.
You sent me your bio for this. I asked you for a brief bio, and you said that you graduated from UMass in communications with a film certification, which I mean, that's I went to URI for film, so that piqued my interest.
Oh, so now we're friends.
Now
we
we're
were
friends.
already friends. But
Wait a minute. No. So that got me to thinking, what was your planned path? Because we're going to talk a bit about the work that you do, which is vast and really interesting. But communications and film is a little bit of a different course. What was your path back then?
Sure. So my dad has always taught me, grew up with a single father, if you're doing something that you love and you get paid for it, that's what you're supposed to do. So at the time, I was doing a lot around television production. I wanted to be a film director. I was all into it from middle school, high school. I did a lot with my church at the time and filmed every single service. I got so great at editing and directing and running shows and productions that I actually taught the teachers at my high school how to edit, how to use Final Cut Pro, iMovie when it came out. So it just seemed like it was natural. It was like a hobby, but that turned into a passion. But I really wanted to be a marine biologist. I was a nerd and watched too many episodes of Voyage of the Mimi. They showed it to us in school. I watched it outside of school, didn't tell my friends, how that would have gone over. And I really loved it. And I was like, how do you combine these things? But unfortunately, I had a really bad guidance counselor who told me that I did not look like a marine biologist. And so that part was kind of voided. I went to UMass Amherst for communications and film studies because it seemed like the natural next step.
And then you ended up, what's your path then to end up in Mystic? So you ended up at Mystic Aquarium. Was that your first aquarium job?
That was my first aquarium job. Yeah. So when I was in communications, what they don't tell you is how much you cover. So it's a very broad major. It's a Bachelor of Arts. And so I did a lot of political science classes. I did a lot of theory around communication and anthropology and how people communicate with one another, but also how we historically capture things. I'm a nerdy historian person. I really love history, so it just seemed very cool to weave different aspects of my work. And I'm obsessed with film, old films. Film noir is one of my favorites. Martin Scorsese. I've got a lot of people that I love. And so there was just this really cool blending. But one of the things that I noticed is that when we started to do some outreach efforts at UMass Amherst to recruit students to come to campus, they did a massive campaign around getting young people in underserved communities, that's what they called them at the time, to UMass. So they said, hey, we're going to bring in these Springfield kids to come, excuse me, and see the TV studio. Is that okay? I said, of course. So we did a tour, and I had always worked at camps, and I naturally connected with these kids. I'm like, yeah, you can touch this. They couldn't believe it. Nobody had ever let them touch a $10,000 camera. They saw the sports sets that, at colleges and universities, they put a lot of money into that. I ran a $50 million budget. I was the president of the TV studio. So they're like, wow. And in the moment, they got so excited. They're like us. They're interviewing, they're pretending to film. I said, no, film really. We'll record this. You can take it home. They were so pumped. And I interviewed them, and their teacher was crying. And she said they've never opened up like this to anybody. And we talked about how they were staying out of gangs. So it was interesting to me to see the access there. And my brothers didn't have access. Clearly, I didn't have access at certain points in my life. And so I somehow stumbled into after-school programs and out-of-school time learning programs. When I moved down here, that was the job. And I was like, yeah, I worked at a camp. I can run an after-school program. And through that, I met Mystic Aquarium. And Roger Williams Park Zoo, and a lot of the great museums and partnerships that really engage kids. And Mystic Aquarium had this unique ability to take a clipboard out of a kid's hand and really engage them on hands-on learning, and I became obsessed. Especially because I was already interested kind of in that field still around marine biology, and I didn't realize all of the different jobs. I didn't know anything about conservation, so learning about all of that with the kids was really exciting. And so that's how I became connected to Mystic Aquarium. So I was actually partnered with them for over a decade before I started working there.
It's a crazy trajectory. That's pretty awesome. And you, so you talked about after-school arts programs and things like that. You're on a number of boards.
Soon to change.
In education, I mean, they're all kind of geared around education and after school and things like that. And you said that you look at things through a racial equity lens. And I'm wondering what's your work with, well, first of all, before we get to that, where are you now? What's your job now? I mean, you kind of moved from Mystic Aquarium to, you're still in the aquarium world, but what are you doing now?
Yeah, so it's interesting. It has to do with access and opportunity and pushing policy at a federal level. And when I got to Mystic Aquarium, I became in love. I was like, this is it. This feels good. Everything about it, from the animal care specialists and how much they have passion around what they do, all of the different jobs, all the way down to life support and facilities, the amount of passion that everybody had, the entry level. Some people were there on a high school diploma. Some people got their GED and then went in, and people believed in them, and now they're in these amazing roles, and they do an amazing and incredible job. All the way to people with their doctorates and doing research projects that wouldn't necessarily get funded out in a different space, but at an aquarium, there's a lot of interest, and the impact that they have impacts food insecurity up in Inuit, Alaska, all the way to doing a tribal exchange program where the young people down here in the Narragansett and Mashantucket Pequot tribe are learning how to hunt up in Alaska, and then vice versa. So it's just so cool. And hearing those stories, I'm like, especially with like a communications mind, I was like, nobody knows what's going on in Mystic Aquarium. They're just coming here, they're looking at the animals, and then they're leaving. And I'm like, so we need to get that story out. And my job now is working with 30 different aquariums and zoos. We do high-level policy with federal agencies, but we also really put awareness out there of the power of aquariums. With Aquarium Conservation Partnership, which Mystic Aquarium is a part of, we have over 35 million foot visitors a year and over hundreds of millions of visitors on our social media. So our access and span to the public is rather large, and it's global. And so I love my job because we get to talk about all the amazing things. In particular, aquariums are good at convening people and from cross-sector and really getting to tough conversations around protecting our planet. And I think that with the racial equity lens, we've been able to bring in a lot of different diverse voices around how they feel about protecting the planet versus social justice issues, health equity issues, and really combining those worlds to make people understand that stewarding the lands and waters is all about that as well. And so really taking that intersection, those cross-sector partnerships, and really making them make sense. And so I get to do that now.
And do you get to tie that into some of the board work that you're doing around the state of Rhode Island? Are you kind of taking a similar approach to that work?
Absolutely. So I'm on the RIA board, the Rhode Island Environmental Education Association, and it's really amazing to be able to describe to lawmakers, to describe to world leaders how that functions in a small state. These environmental education associations are across the country, and they're environmental educators that teach in the out-of-school time learning space, and they get youth and adults out there into nature and find nature-based solutions, do habitat restoration, really cool, fun things. And especially here in Rhode Island, where the coastline, there's an assumption that everybody gets to the coastline. That's just not true. And so these amazing programs that are in the network of the Rhode Island Environmental Education Association provide that access and opportunity to all sorts of diverse youth. And when you're able to share that story out and say, hey, Mystic Aquarium is a part of that network, that coalition, and they're part of several coalitions, people are like, oh, okay, I see how I can do that. And I get to bring that tomorrow. I'm leaving for Greece to go to our Oceans Conference.
Wow,
and work with Spec Carey and state administration from the U.S., but also global leaders, on how to integrate that cross-sector partnership around ocean protection, climate change readiness, resilient communities that are impacted. And Mystic is impacted by climate change. People forget that, and people put a stamp on it. It's Mystic, it's fine. And I'm out here saying, not that I'm trying to sound the alarm, but saying, hey, we are not fine enough for us to be ignored.
And So a lot of questions I ask in this I try to tie things a little bit back into Westerly. You talked a little bit about loving the coastline here. The coastline was a draw. Misquamicut was a draw. That's something that brought you here. You got married on Misquamicut. What other...
During the off season, we didn't pay anything. I just want to make that clear.
I always ask the question, though, like, what are your favorite things to do around Westerly and what do you love? But I kind of want to reframe that question for you, for what you just talked about. You know, when you are doing that education and bringing kids into coastal communities and areas, so what in these areas, Westerly, you can include Mystic as well, like what parts of these areas are you excited to bring kids to and expose them? Like what are the things in this region that excite you most from that perspective, from that education perspective and showcasing the coastal reach of this community?
Yeah, so my father, single father, no money, poor artist, he's a painter. He was at a professor at a university, and they always tend to close that department down when they're struggling.
Yep.
And so 3 kids, and the quickest, fastest, funnest, freest place to go was the New England coastline. And so that's where we went. We picked it on the map. I came down here in all my programs, and I started working in Cranston, Rhode Island, and I was like, oh, let's go down to Misquamicut. I work at the Andrea. I worked at the Andrea for over 10 years. I was a bartender. And I was like, we can go down there, eat at the Andrea, because they opened it up special for the kids. They made spaghetti and meatballs, fruit. The kids were obsessed. And I'm like, we can go down there during April vacation, have a really great time. And so I had no idea what I was doing. I realized when I got the kids there, because they literally, and I'm going to get up for a minute, they literally all got out of they got out of the bus. And so there are 2 buses, and they got out of the bus, and they're dressed. This is April, okay? They're dressed head to toe in snowsuits. And I'm looking, I was down here, I live down here, and I'm like, okay, these Cranston kids, what's going on here? And they're getting out and they're talking to each other, and some of them are peeling off the layers. And then we had this whole line of kids, and they're going like this. And so Toddy, who works down there, you know, the fire chief down there, he goes, hey, Ayana, what's wrong with these kids? They've never seen the sand before. And I'm like looking at all of them are going like this, and they're like, and I'm like, what is happening? And I mean, you're talking about 7th graders, 8th graders.
Yeah.
So one of the kids comes in and he says, Miss, the bus driver's crying. And I'm like, what the heck did these kids do to this bus driver? So I go out and I'm looking at these kids like, what are you doing? Go stand over here. Have you never seen sand? And they're kind of looking at me funny. I go over to the bus driver and I'm looking back at the kids. They're getting yelled at because they're putting rocks in their bag. And they're like, we can bring these back to Cranston. And I'm like, what is happening, right? So the bus driver, I go, are you all right? What the kids do? She's like, they didn't do anything. I've never been here before. Are we still in Rhode Island? 63 years old, born and raised in Cranston, and she never, ever, ever has seen the shoreline. So she was shocked. And it's beautiful down there, right? Yeah. Well, then I'm like thinking, okay, if you haven't seen it. So I go to the kids, I go, have you ever been here? No. And one of them's like, Miss, we haven't even been to the beach. I'm like, this is disturbing. I had 250 kids, and more than half of them had never been to the coastline, ever in their lives, 8th graders. Now, of course, they heard the rumor that Taylor Swift was down here. We did lure some of them in with that hope that they could see her. So they went on the walk down to see Taylor Swift. Now, when they were leaving, they were all like, we saw her, because there was a helicopter, and somebody convinced them that they saw blonde hair. So I'm like, whatever. They go home to Cranston being like, we saw Taylor Swift. There's a win, right? But this one group of kids, 3rd graders, that I had known since they were little, are like, we saw pirates. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, no, real life pirates. They were so convinced. And you know kids, and you're like, all right. And they're getting on the bus. They're crying now because one of the people made them take all the rocks out from Cranston. They were like, we're not going back with these rocks. So they're crying. They're getting on the bus. It's dramatic. So they leave, and, you know, Michelle and Becca from the Andrea are like, we have to do this every year. That was incredible, so heartwarming. These kids were so thankful and gracious, and they did do it every year while I worked in Cranston, by the way, for free. You know, yeah. The Andrea is amazing. And so I get in my car to drive home later, and I'm driving down past the Andrea, past Pleasant View, and I see a bunch of construction workers on a house. And yeah, they look like pirates. And they had spliffs hanging out of their mouths, bandanas on, beards. And I just started laughing, and I said, these kids saw pirates.
Yeah.
But what they did on the beach in such a short visit, they interacted with the lifeguards. My friend Seamus Martin showed them lifeguard tactics. He showed them the tools, and they got to ask questions about what lifeguards have, what they need, how to become a lifeguard. They did a coastal field study, so they got to learn about the life that's right there in front in Mesquamaket Beach in the ocean, but also what's behind there in the salt ponds. They were able to interact with business owners and learn that they could work at the Andrea as a 14-year-old and up. Those experiences you can't make up, you can't really plan for. It was a holistic thing that just happened. And at the end of the day, I was like, I have to do this all the time. So I've made it a mission. I've made it a goal to get kids to our coastline. It is my favorite place of Westerly, down in Mesquamaket. And I appreciate, and why I'm still here, is the business owners, not just the Andrea, but they've been so welcoming to my kids. And when we've done fundraisers, they've provided baskets. They never questioned, Norwich or Cranston. They never questioned where it is. They've always provided for us. Jonathan Edwards even. I know it's not in Westerly, but still doing these kind of things where I can go down this strip and get all the businesses to participate in helping young people, that's meaningful. It's a community, right? And so I'm just hoping that still stays alive.
I end all of these with the same kind of question, which is this question about your place in the community in the future, your legacy, basically. Like, what would you like to see your work in this community leave behind as a legacy? How do you want to see this community striving in 5 years from now? Like, what's your vision for the community? This is what I end with all the time. But I think, a lot of your answers have kind of pointed towards that answer. But do you ever think about that, about the work that you do and about the legacy that it leaves behind on the community, this community? And,
Absolutely.
And what you want that to be?
Absolutely. So I'll stay diplomatic. I'll stay non-controversial tonight, kind of. Small. I think, don't get me excited. So I think one of the things that I 100% want to see is the experience I had in La Jolla, California. Never been to California. 2.5 years ago, we were supposed to go. Things went awry when the pandemic kind of ramped back up again for a minute. The conference was canceled. But I'm like, I want to go to this place because I kept calling it La Jolla, watched a video, found out that was wrong, that I was going to La Jolla. And my friends had always tried to get me to go to California, and I was like, no, I'm a Boston girl. I don't need to go there. I got a coastline here. I got 7 miles here. I'm good. So I went to La Jolla, and the whole time I just couldn't believe it. I think I cursed Westerly up and down. I was like, how the hell can you take a bus to the beach in a very affluent area? The bus is less than $1. My whole family, I've got car seats, everything, nobody's asking, and we just walked onto the beach. Nobody made us pay anything. Nobody said, who are you? Everybody's there. There's giant, not these tiny little receptacles, giant recycling bins encouraging composting, trash cans everywhere. And what I noticed, because I'm a very observant person, is that it didn't matter who it was. There were some teenagers kind of all laughing and hanging out. There were some older people walking up and down. There were animals on the beach. Nobody freaked out. And everybody was picking up trash. Everybody. They were picking it up. It was like a habit, unconscious thing, throwing it away, moving along with their day. Not a big deal. So I'm having a moment because I'm like, why can't we have this in the smallest state in the union? It should be easy. I'm on the beach with a family. We're all having a moment. It's like 60-something degrees, but to a New Englander, we're like, it's summer! And we're in the water. My kids are in the water. We didn't have bathing suits, but my kids are in the water in their underwear, whatevs. And 2 people walk up to us on the beach, dressed in pretty much plain clothes. And I noticed when they got closer, they had a badge on them. They were police. And he said, I want to take a picture. Let me take a picture of you and your family, because he saw us taking pictures from afar. So him and his partner are taking pictures, like a photo shoot. And they're like, are you enjoying your time? I'm like, yeah, we love it. He's like, good. And he's like, and then they kept going. They didn't ask us who we were, if we lived there. They just talked to us. And I realized those were police officers. The experience was phenomenal. And I want to replicate that here. That's what I want my legacy to be. I want our beaches to have access. There's nothing wrong with it. And people will clean the beaches up. You don't have to start a whole Misquamicut Waste Warriors, because people will start to steward it on their own. Provide trash cans for us, please, on our beaches, and recycle bins. That concept. So I want that. I want to see that in 5 years is just a really robust, loving place that involves people and listens to people and realizes why they want to have that connection with the water, and let it happen and not charge us $60
That's a good answer.
per day.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Yeah. Well, we're going to leave it at that. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I look forward to that 5-year plan.
Okay,
Let's,
excellent.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Right.
You're going to do it with me?
I'll do it with you.
Look at that.
Yeah. 2 people down. All right. Thank you, Ayana.
Thank
Give it
you
up for
so
Ayana.
much, Tony.
Thanks for tuning in to the United Theater Podcast Network. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. And if you could take a moment to leave a review, we'd greatly appreciate it. Your feedback helps us create content that you love. So hit that subscribe button and leave us a review, and we'll see you on the next episode.